My name is Nick Schuster, and we're with the Center for Renewing America, an organization created to confront the woke and weaponized agenda of the ruling class and replace it with a vision that puts God, country, and community back at the center of policymaking in Washington. Today, we're discussing a topic that has become unavoidable: the rise of Islamism in the United States and its dangerous influence in Western nations, its growing foothold inside the United States, and what recent events reveal about the ideological threat to our constitutional order. I'm joined by two others at CRA who've been tracking this closely, Wade Miller and Nathan Pinkowski, who've been doing deep research into this topic. Now, I'll start with you, Nathan. Before we dive in, I want to define Islamism and tell people exactly what we mean when we use that term. Do you mind doing that for us?
Yeah, so what we need to understand about Islamism is a political ideology. It's a global project that's designed to subordinate all aspects of government, all aspects of the state, and all aspects of civil society to Islam. And it has a number of means to do this. And really what we see when we're talking about Islamization is we're talking about the transformation, the total transformation of all aspects of society to achieve this goal. There's the financial resources are brought to bear. The communicative resources, the latest technological advances are brought to bear. Educational resources are brought to bear, changing the way that schools operate. And then, of course, there's the demographic one, the one that we're starting to see more and more of in our country.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, do you know the exact figure of how much the foreign-born Islamist population has grown in the United States?
Well, so we have to remember here that not all Muslims are Islamists, but all Islamists are Muslims, and this is what makes a certain segment of the population uniquely vulnerable to Islamism. So what we have to bear in mind here is that the population of Muslims, well, it looks comparatively small at the moment, is uniquely vulnerable to this group. And secondly, we have to remember that this is growing at a very, very rapid pace. So the numbers approaching now 2%. Of course, that sounds very small, but we have to think about the European cases where a similar number like this 30, 40 years ago is now up to 10%, and of course plays a very large role in society. I think a good example that helps contextualize this, because again, if we say the number 2%, or it's coming up 2%, assuming these figures are accurate, it sounds like a very small amount. But just to give one example, New York City, we're approaching about 1 million Muslims now. This is becoming larger, and will set in the next few years. It's set to be larger than the Jewish population in the city. Again, relatively small, of course, given the overall size of the area. But who would say that the Jews don't play a sizable cultural or political influence in New York City? They've obviously helped define and shape the norms and values of that city for some time. Islam is set to do the same.
Mm-hmm. Wade, I'm going to turn to you here on this. So he did a pretty good job of framing the threat that we're currently facing, but why is this a political threat? Like, why is Islamism a political ideology and not just a religion or part of a religion?
Sure. So this is a thing that in the Western world, a lot of people have a hard time conceptualizing because our experiences with religion are different. And, there's 33,000 plus sects of Christianity. We have longstanding, interactions with Hindus, Sikhs, Jews, other religions. And those are wholly different. Islam is very different from all of these other faiths. And if you're a westernized person and your experience with faith is little exposure to Islam, it's hard to understand because Islam is a legal system, it's a political system, it's an economic system, it dictates everything, it has enforcement mechanisms. And so anywhere in the world where we see large populations of Muslims, we see elements of this, and this is why I think that you don't really see any type of westernized cultures or governments in those countries because you can't go outside of those bounds too far. And so, it gets to the point where it is a conquering ideology by design. And, a lot of people will counter this and they'll say, well, there's all of these beautiful verses in there. Again, the Quran is different than the Bible. It's different than the Torah. It's different than all other religious texts in that it has a specific prescription that prevents any type of moderation or the ability to read something and interpret it in a certain way that can conform with Western civilization. And that is that it says that if there's anything that conflicts at all, basically whatever Muhammad said towards the end is supreme. And so in his early life, Muhammad was all this flowery language. In his later life, it was very warlike language, very violent language. And like there's historical reasons for that, but nevertheless, the way it has manifested itself is that more radicalized, violent, conquering ideology is the predominant worldview that is expressed by imams all over the world. And so, yes, not all Muslims are Islamists, but all Islamists are Muslims. And here's the problem, though, is that for those Muslims who are moderate, and there are not a lot of sects of Islam. There's basically Sunni and Shia. There's Sufis, and that's a little different. It's a little bit more mystical, allows itself to lend itself a little bit more to interpretation and moderation. But Sunni and Shia do not to that degree. And they're unlike most any other world religion in that respect. They're very confined and rigid in the way it dictates how everything must happen. And anything that goes outside of that is seen as an affront to the entirety of the religion. So there's just not a lot of moderation. That's why we see, again, individual people may be completely fine people, but in large numbers, what happens is culturally we see Islam start to radicalize those populations. Maybe they don't really believe it, but they feel pressured culturally to conform with that Islamic culture that is growing. And so they will start to adhere to certain things because there's just less, and we've seen this in other immigration groups where they live near each other and they don't really assimilate properly. That's a problem always. It is more of a problem here because, again, their faith tradition, it just doesn't really, even over time, over successive generations, it doesn't really break out. It doesn't lead to assimilation down the road. And I think that this was the great failure of Europe, is that they just assumed assimilation and diversity and all of these great things and the blessings of a multicultural society would come forth. And I think that what they're seeing is that they have bedrock principles upon which their societies are founded on and rely upon. And the Muslim populations are not adhering or embracing those to a large degree. And in fact, it's the opposite. They are seeking to change it so that those societies conform with them. And that's the major difference that we're seeing.
So this is why we see quotes from prominent Islamists saying stuff like the flag of Sharia will eventually fly above Downing Street, or don't worry about the Islamophobe. Their children will be Muslim. I think that you really touch on that perfectly. I'm going to go to both of you. So from both of your perspectives, why has this topic become so urgent, especially this year?
Well, a lot of reasons. We've had the recent shootings in D.C. By a man who's a Muslim, and we don't know all the motives yet. And I've seen even in the last 24 hours reports. Well, my argument would be we should have resettled those populations. Some have been saying, well, we should have brought more people over to prevent this. Mm-hmm. Well, my argument would be we should have resettled those populations of Afghans regionally around Afghanistan and not brought any of them here. It's a highly radicalized, violently radicalized population. The percentages of people there that believe in very, very radical things is like 90+%. And we can talk a little bit about that more later. But there's been that. We've recently seen things like Epic City, these Muslim communities that are insular, intentional communities that are not designed to embrace America and our traditions, but to insulate themselves and to cultivate their own religion. And look, I'm a Christian. I want everyone to become Christian, but I'm not going to Afghanistan and trying to bring Christians with me to get to the point where I can start forcibly changing everyone. And this is we're seeing this elsewhere, but and this is the real problem in Minneapolis and the Somali communities there in Dearborn, Michigan, and we're seeing that increasingly in Houston, that they are rapidly increasing their levels of population, and they are now voting politically and electing people who agree with them and disagree with the native cultures that exist. And that's leading to friction. It's leading to social friction because multiculturalism is not a real thing. It is a real thing. It's a failed ideology, and it cannot work. You can bring people over. You can have immigration, but it always needs to be at levels that recognizes that the native culture must be catered to first, and its interest must be considered first. Because if you don't, what are you going to have? You're going to have social friction. You're going to have regime instability, and that's going to lead to all sorts of negative externalities down the road and outcomes. And so I think you're seeing people that are starting to see this happen. They're starting to see, wait, they have Sharia courts in the United States of America? How many mosques are here now? Wait, they're electing foreign-born Muslims who hate America and want to use Congress to the betterment of their home country first? Like, what the heck is going on here? So there's all sorts of things going on that are different than 2001 when there was a terrorist attack on this country. That was more of a, well, we got to defend ourselves against foreign Muslims. Now we're seeing that we've allowed millions of Islamic radicals or culturally radicalized Muslims to come to the United States, and we're seeing it in real time in our communities manifest itself. Now, again, it's not an absolute. Not all Muslims are this way, but it is also regional. If you're bringing someone from Afghanistan, high likelihood that they are highly radicalized culturally. Meaning that they may support suicide bombings in some instances, they may support Baqabazi, they may support child brides, they may support killing apostates. And then there's other areas of the world where they're more moderate, but even those populations, compared to the culture of the United States of America and our value systems, even those cultures to a high degree, a high rate, have culturally radicalized views from our perspectives. Again, I'm not saying. I mean, I have a personal opinion that they're wrong. I don't really care what they do in Morocco.
Right.
I don't really care what they do in Afghanistan. Live their lives. I do care when they come here and try to change. And I think that's what is animating people, the resurgence of this concern about Islam in America.
Mm-hmm. Nathan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's two things that we can say as well. One is that as these groups start to organize politically, as they elect representatives, they start to see the state as a source of entitlement extraction. So you start to use the resources of the state to further your own ethnic allegiances, to solidify your perception of the way that civil society operates. This is really what's at the heart of the recent scandal in Minnesota. It's that people seeing government programs not as something that exists to help those in need in this country, not to exist the poor, but rather an opportunity to use this program to solidify a political agenda on the other side of the world, to continue and enhance those ethnic ties that are there. The other thing too, and this is I think where the European example is very useful to study closely, because in Europe they've had this issue for decades for how to deal with a large Muslim population. And what's happened is they applied a standard which was basically a kind of liberal neutrality standard, an effort to try to treat everyone the same, to ensure that that we apply the law universally without any partiality to religious groups. But what's happened is basically that the standard gets altered to meet the pressure that these Muslims place on society. So I'll give you a French example from actually a long time ago, from 1989, where it was famous at the time. There were 3 girls who refused to wear or to take off their veil inside a school. And the French context is particularly important because the French Republican system is supposed to have no overt displays of religion in the classroom.
Right.
So setting the religious freedom issue is different from our environment aside here. What was going on here is it launched a debate about, well, how do we accommodate or handle this your personal religious freedom versus the demands for neutrality. But the big thing that was missed in this discussion is the fact that they saw, these were people who'd grown up in France, and they saw themselves as having to continue to wear the same customs, to adhere to the same principles, to uphold the same rules about how you dress that they had in North Africa in France. So it was already then showing a failure of assimilation. So these debates and these nuanced discussions that we have about the meaning of neutrality, the balance of rights, which they've had for years, didn't get to the heart of the problem, which was a refusal to assimilate. And I think what we have when we try to apply these laws, another example that is just in the news recently is not from Europe, but from Quebec. Which I think is a very important one to bear in mind because it shows you how the neutrality standard gets applied. So they've had a problem in Montreal especially, and this is especially in the wake of the of the terrorist attacks in Israel, of street protests that got a little too out of hand. And of course, there are these Muslim pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protests, you have prayer in the streets. So rather than confront this specific problem directly, the government of Quebec thought, well, we have to maintain the neutrality principle. So what they have done is they've banned all public prayer, now subject to, or at least will be in a couple of weeks, subject to a fine if you practice public prayer. But we know how these laws get applied in practice. They don't actually go after those particular groups. What happens is they go after the people who are often Christian, who want to pray, say, maybe have some kind of faith gathering outside in public, maybe something more specific. And this is indeed in Quebec. They had this incident a few months ago where there was a Christian musician who was wanting to have some kind of display outside, and then of course this became very controversial. So the neutrality principle, even if it worked, even if you could find the perfect balance, gets enforced against the majority, often the Christian majority, and as a way to give the minority, the one that's actually doing the subversive or disruptive behavior, gives them a pass. This is what we call asymmetrical multiculturalism. I think it's an important point for our viewers to know that multiculturalism in practice doesn't lead to everyone being treated the same. What it happens is you have burdens placed upon the majority to behave in certain ways that the minorities do not get to uphold. And this is where Islam and the Islamists know how the system works. They understand it. They've seen it for years operate in this way. And that's how come they're so clever about weaponizing charges of Islamophobia, because it helps enhance this asymmetry which is built into the system.
Well, let me, were you done?
Yeah,
let me just add on to this. So one of the arguments is that, well, it's only a few hundred Somalis. Like, how are we going to hold the entire Somalian community responsible for this? And isn't that just bigotry? And, well, I mean, look, yes, there is a meth addict that's, making meth in a trailer park somewhere in rural Oklahoma, and that person's committing Social Security or welfare fraud. This happens. What we're talking about are communities that are coming from areas of the world where that activity of defrauding and lying for personal gain and financial gain is just culturally the norm. In Somalia, it's a highly corrupt society. And so, part of this entire discussion isn't like, are these Somalians like radical terrorists? Are they part of Al-Qaeda?
Yeah.
If that is true, of course, we don't want them coming here. But it's also a discussion about culturally, who are we inviting to come to our country, and are they suitable? And when you have hundreds of Somalians doing this, involved in this type of thing, we're really talking about ratios of people compared to the broader community. This would be the equivalent of having, this is not exact math because I don't know the actual proportions, but like, let's just say 10,000 white people in Minneapolis were participating in a scheme. That would be an enormous amount of people. Somalians are a small percentage, and yet there's a lot of corruption that's going on that's being uncovered in that specific community, in that specific city. And look, is everyone involved in that community? No. Did some people that weren't directly involved but knew about it keep their mouth shut and didn't report? Probably. So it's more than just the number of people. It's that this is part of the conversation we need to have. Why are so many of these people doing this from that community, and other crimes and other problems and other issues? And, is it a part of where they come from? Because you do not see this from people coming here from Argentina. Like, why? Why is it different? Why are Somalians doing this, but the Argentinian community is not doing that?
Yeah.
And this is a core part of the problem, which is it's a cultural. And this is why the vetting problem, and we can talk about vetting problems here in a minute, but it's not just about, are they on an ISIS watch list? It's about, what do they actually believe? And if they believe these things, we should be able to say they shouldn't be coming here.
Yeah, and we have to remember too that with Islamism, it is this project not just to set up an intentional community or to be left alone. It has this desire to expand, to take over more and more institutions. That global aspect is what makes it particularly dangerous. We import not just the tribal conflicts of other parts of the world, in itself bad enough, but we import tribes that have the desire to take us all over, to replace us with another culture and another civilization. And that's why I think after 9/11, we made a mistake in a lot of our discussion about this. We focus on the terrorism problem itself, big deal, but we forgot that there is this other, often nonviolent and practiced very successfully, nonviolent strategy of cultural replacement. So we were so busy focusing on the violence, concerns about supporting violence, concerns about fighting terrorism, that we forgot that in most cases, the real success of Islamism has been through this other strategy of nonviolent cultural replacement. But the end result is the same.
Did you just say great replacement?
Did I say the great replacement?
So we've touched on the problems of Europe and in the United States. Let's talk about and I'm going to, this is for both of you. Let's talk about like the specific, what are their specific end goals? I mean, you're seeing, places like Epic City in Texas. You mentioned the Somali communities in Minnesota. Obviously there's major problems in Europe with like honor killings in Italy and England. So like the main thing that, a lot of Muslims believe in is Sharia law. I thought we could talk a little bit more about that. I'll start with you, Nathan.
Well, look, I think we have to, again, go back to what is the template that has been implemented in other places, the precedents that have already been set. And that's why when we look at those, we see that the kind of ways that these communities get established isn't to participate in the fuller aspects of, I would say, British life or French life. To go back to the school example, right? You tell your children to wear the veil in school, partly there may be an aspect of sincere belief here, but what that does is it encourages or perhaps puts pressure on the girls who aren't wearing their veil, who come from Muslim background, that they better wear their veil. And then what you do over time is you establish that this is a school that is dominated by Islam. And so you take what would otherwise be imagined as a neutral public institution like a school, and you slowly over time set it up and socialize people to say that this is really an Islamic controlled Islamic run school. You do the same for city councils. This is something that the British have seen recently, and not just at the city council level, but also at the parliamentary level, at the level of national politics, where there are representatives who exist to represent the particular ethnic and Islamic factions at the national level. So we see this kind of template, and that's just talking about the political side. We could talk about the financial side as well, the demographic side built into this as well. If you take advantage of loose immigration laws, you can bring more and more of your clan members, your family members in to ensure that you continue to get a lock on particular cities. So we have to see this as, I think, abandon the notion that these are just intentional communities. Maybe the problem is they're a little too isolated. They run themselves without contact with the rest of society. They see the institutions that are around them, and they want to take control of those institutions, whether it's the schools, whether it's the banks, whether it's the political offices of local government or indeed national government.
Mm-hmm. Wait.
In other countries overseas, they have entire Sharia courts. They actually enforce the Quran and its dictates on the people, and it is their court system. There's no separate court system in a lot of these Islamic countries. So what you'll see here is you'll see conversations about how it's, Sharia is just basically principles that we should live by. And that makes sense if you're a Westerner because you have principles, you think of it in terms of a pastor mediating a dispute between two congregants or something like that. So we have analogs to that idea. The problem is that it's not really that, and it's never meant to be just that. It's not meant. It's actually a system, political, economic, social, that drives everything that people do, and these communities over time want to start slow walking in Sharia compliance. And they use their own, at first informal, and then as they gain more voting power, formal. And so what you see is that at small numbers, you see some moderation, some assimilation, although different than other population groups that have come over historically. And then as they start gaining in population size, first it's 3%, 5%. And once you start getting to 10 or 15%, then you see a more formal implementation of things like this. They start, Epic City. They start having, and we're seeing reports in I think Houston where they have Sharia courts already. And again, it's one thing if every party is voluntarily submitting to this from a faith-based perspective, but the moment that someone doesn't have a choice, it now becomes, I would argue, completely unconstitutional, and I think most people would. But it becomes it's trying to replace our justice system now. It is forcing and violating the civil rights of other people by forcing them to contend with it. And the big problem is that, of course, as populations increase, the enforcement of it will increasingly not just be against Muslims. It will start to be against non-Muslims. And so we already see this where, in Europe, in some places, you can't practice free speech in certain areas. The cops will arrest you, or they'll arrest you for hate speech because now the Muslims can criticize Christ or Christians, but if you criticize Muslims, it's a hate crime and they'll come and arrest you. If you put a meme out on the internet, arrest you for this is a de facto implementation of Sharia law through other systems. It's not called Sharia, but that's what happens as the populations become big enough. The existing infrastructure starts to unofficially start helping to enforce it. And then as that population becomes confident enough in their own, political, economic security, they will start formally putting these things into place. And this is what we're seeing increasingly happening in Europe.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to change gears here a little bit. We've talked about the ends, the threat, but now let's talk about the mechanics more or less. So what I'm going to ask both of you here is we've seen an alliance between Islamists and far left progressives. We've seen this in the rise of Mondani in New York City. Some of our lovely members of the Squad in Congress, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib. So I'm going to start with you, Nathan. So can you break down sort of this alliance? How did it form, and how is it going to work out in the end here?
Well, look, I think we often jump right to the end and say, look, these people have positions which are in tension or in contradiction with each other that'll never hold. But it has worked very well on the European continent, this kind of alliance, for some time, and it's because they have a common enemy. It's us. It's the majority population. It's the kinds of institutions that we want to defend and uphold. The kind of our understanding of the Constitution and its importance. So we really have to bear that in mind, that we can have our memes going around that point out the contradictions, the rainbow flag on the one hand, right, and how that would last if people supporting that or tried to wave that, say, in Gaza or something like that. But I think that's beside the point. Is that electorally, it's a very effective strategy, and it's not just something that we can write off as or describe as a socialism or something like that. We have to have a new vocabulary to handle this. We could call it maybe third worldism, the way it exploits the victimology or is designed around a victimology of those of immigrants, of people who are perceived to be oppressed, and you try to make use of that politically to effect transformation. So I think that's just something we have to be very, very clear here, is that this is a political alliance that exists in many other countries. It's becoming more and more common. More and more left-wing parties are defining themselves in those terms. And what enables them to get the vote is not just what we tend to hear about, right, like millennials who get attracted by socialism because they took bad courses in college or something like that. It also has to do with the demographic change that we see happening. I mentioned New York earlier, where I think there's, under the last census, about 800,000 Muslims. So there's a basis here in terms of demographic change that provides the votes, and there's a party apparatus that is designed to support and continue to advance this. So unless we're willing to do something about the immigration numbers, then we're going to have this problem become more and more significant, and more local politics, or indeed national politics, will be defined in these terms. Expect many more Mamdanis if we don't deal with that problem.
So it's an interesting marriage in that I think that the Muslim community looks at the progressive left as useful idiots to their cause. I think that they recognize that the right kind of understands the threat of Islam and doesn't see the right largely as a vehicle to their ends, there's going to be small areas of agreement. So I think that you'll see the Muslim community will oppose at the local level, like woke ideology in the schools to some degree, not all of it, but certain applications of it. And so you may see like a city council member being replaced. But at the larger level, they align mainly with the left because I think that a lot of these communities come from countries that have, Islamofascism is a real term for a reason. There's Ba'athist parties that have that lineage of kind of a big government, authoritarian, dictator-like system. There's communist traditions that come out of a lot of Islamic countries. There's socialist traditions. And I think that, by and large, a lot of these populations, not all of them, but a lot of them come here, some of them as refugees, some of them as asylum seekers, because they recognize the opportunities that the United States provides them, not just jobs, but benefits. And so I think that they like the idea, and they are not born in the United States and they're not raised in the United States through the traditions and ideology of John Locke and limited government and like what do the founders think and why. And so they're not coming here with that mindset. They're coming here saying, this is the richest country in the world. What can it do for me? Again, not everyone. I'm just speaking in broad generalities here. But there's a lot of people that come here, and so they like big government. They like social programs. They're benefiting off of them. We see the Somalians and what we're uncovering there. And I think that they ultimately, as a group, again, there's differences of opinion within that group. But I think as a group, there's a large tendency to support big government progressivism because they see progressives that are in love with diversity and multiculturalism. And even though these communities don't want diversity and multiculturalism, they see that the predominant culture right now is in the way. And these are tools that the progressive left uses that will undermine the current culture and help them fill that vacuum over time and break it down and cause social discord and regime instability because you'll increasingly have factions that are dissatisfied and driving wedges between American, the different strains of American ideologies. And I think that that's predominantly why you see Mamdani running. And then at the same time, even though Muslim communities all over the world are highly hostile in violent ways to homosexuals, you will see the New York City Gay and Lesbian Alliance marching in support of him, flying their Gaza flags, because at the end of the day, I think the Islamic communities and Mamdani are not idiots, and they see that the left is the best opportunity for them in the short term. And they will ride that wave as long as they can. And as soon as they no longer need the progressive left, they will be discarded and left by the wayside. And the fact that the progressive left does not see this is endlessly, if it weren't for the dire consequences, it kind of makes me laugh because they just have no idea that they're being played at all. Not at all. And so I think that is the nexus of why Islamists, for the most part, tend to want to side with the progressive left as we see it right now.
Right. So to further expand on this as well, how should the right, the American right, respond to this, the conservative movement? I'm going to start with you, Nathan, because we've seen that through the war on terror and whatnot, I think you mentioned this before, how we really only focused on the terrorism aspect of this and not the other aspects. So I thought you could expand a little bit more.
Yeah, so that would be the first thing I'd say is we need to look at the cultural replacement strategy, which is often nonviolent rather than terrorism. Second thing I say, and this is what I was alluding to earlier, is that we need to change our paradigm for how we view contemporary politics, especially as our societies become, due to bad immigration policy, more and more multicultural. We need to recognize that most of the big political debates now aren't going to be about socialism versus capitalism. It's going to be oppressor-oppressed, that kind of categorization. It's going to be based off a victimology where politics is often about finding a group that is oppressed, that is pure of any crime, and elevating that group. And unfortunately, much of our movement is very vulnerable to this way of thinking. The charge of Islamophobia is a way to shield us and stop us from questioning the oppressor-oppressed framework, the kind of victimology that's baked into it. I think we need to see that what identity politics is really about is about elevating and making our politics based around this kind of victimhood status of hate speech, perhaps even prosecuted for that in the country. Names, we will be attacked as Islamophobic. Accused of hate speech, perhaps even prosecuted for that in the countries that have legislated that. But we have to be ready to confront this whole pernicious system. And the third thing I'd say, just very quickly, is we have to get control of our borders. We have to change our immigration policy so that we prioritize those who are best suited culturally to be part of it. We talk sometimes about having a points-based system for the economy. I mean, it's a better way to think about it is point-based system for culture. Measure for cultural compatibility, not just in terms of who might contribute more to the GDP. What's more important in the end? Is it the GDP numbers, or is it having a cohesive national culture that's capable of sustaining the Constitution for generations?
Can you restate the question?
So the American right. So we talked about like the alliance between the progressives and Islamists. So how does the American right respond to this? Where are our shortcomings? You know, what do we need to do better? What other novel approaches could we look at to address this rising threat to our country?
I think that first and foremost, our immigration policy, really most policy, but specifically this, it always needs to be looked at through the lens of what is it? What is the American culture? Like we were founded, the government founded, during 1789 or whatever you want to measure that. It was a government that was created on top of a Christian nation. A Christian nation existed, and the government of the United States was formed. And it was formed to protect those Christian people. And so what is the culture? What is the American culture right now? How would we define that? And then all of our answers need to be what is in that culture's best interest. Doesn't mean that our culture is perfect. There's things that I really admire, and like in Japan, the idea of honoring your family. There's things that I admire in other cultures that we don't necessarily do to the right level, I don't think. But nevertheless, public policy should be designed to protect our culture and our national interest, our nation. When I say national interest, I'm saying the group of people and its collective viewpoints and principles and values. Nation is not a government, it's a people. And so our current systems don't do that. Like when we bring over 100,000 or 90,000 Afghans, the vetting system is, are they Al-Qaeda? Basically, and even some of them were not screened to that degree. Now, that's overstating it or understating it, I guess. It's actually there's a lot more steps involved, but it essentially doesn't do ideological vetting at all. So our vetting systems need to be much more aligned with cultural vetting. Like, what do they believe? And if they believe that, is that a problem? And if so, they shouldn't come here. Or if they believe that, but okay, that's fine. We can have 1,000 people in the United States that believe this. That's not a problem. But maybe we can't have 5 million people in the United States that believe that. And so we need a vetting system that takes this in mind. And the problem is that if you actually did cultural vetting, understanding like what's in the best interest of the American people when we have immigration, it would discount a large portion of the people that have come here over the last 20 years, especially from the Islamic world, but not just the Islamic world, other areas of the world, other communities. A lot of those people would not have qualified. And I think that we need to slow down. I think we need to have more deliberate vetting. And at the end of the day, if the answer is this is not in the best interest of American communities that this person comes here, because if this person comes here and 100,000 people that have the same viewpoint come here, we're gonna have problems. Like if 100,000 people come here and 100,000 of those 100,000, 90,000 believe that suicide bombings are sometimes okay, or that child marriage is sometimes okay. Well, guess what? You're probably gonna have increase of pedophilia. You're probably gonna have increased violent crimes. You're probably gonna have all sorts of other negative externalities. And yes, crime exists in the United States. Pedophilia exists. People abuse children. People murder people. But we don't need more of that.
Right.
We have enough problems of our own. Our resources should be dedicated to solving those problems. We're not the bank of the world. We're not here to provide everyone in the world a job. And I think that we need to be able to say that, and people not saying, well, that's racist. Well, no, It's not racist. I don't care what their skin color is. We have people coming in here from all over the world that are probably good additions to our economy, good additions to our culture, of all sorts of different skin colors. But if you believe that apostates should be murdered, you actually believe that, how are you ever going to take an oath to become a citizen? You can't. And that's the other problem is we have millions of people in this country who have taken an oath to the United States Constitution who just fundamentally should not have been able to do that because they're not, they don't actually believe that oath. You cannot, on the one hand, say, I believe that apostates should be murdered, which an enormous amount of Muslims believe. In some countries, it's north of 90%. And then also raise your hand and swear an oath to the United States Constitution. The United States Constitution does not support that. It's a fraudulent oath. Mm-hmm. And I think that we need to be a lot more willing to say that. And I think we need to be able to take a look at people who publicly profess these ideas and say, that's a fraud. You can't say, if you're born here and you're a citizen you're a citizen at birth, properly defined, you can believe whatever you want to believe.
Right.
You can't act on every belief, but you can believe whatever you want to believe. It's a free country in that respect. But if you come here from another country and then fraudulently raise your hand, we should denaturalize those people. If they're out there saying we should overthrow the United States government, we should forcibly convert Christians, we should whatever, we should denaturalize. And so I think we need to get to a place where we are being real. We're looking at Europe. We're seeing what's happening in Europe. We understand that Europe is collapsing and that I don't know that they can come back from it. Maybe Poland, maybe a couple other places. Russia seems to understand the problem of Islam, although Russia's not necessarily Europe. But you understand the point. If we don't look at that and say we need to be a lot more aggressive in terms of protecting our culture, and we need to be okay with saying that and saying that is not racist and that it's actually a good thing and a morally right thing to say, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble in 20, 30 years down the road as these populations continue to expand.
Right. And to further expand on that, there's a phrase going around that the First Amendment is not a suicide pact. And that touches on a lot of what you were saying. And I'm curious on your thoughts, Nathan.
No, that's exactly it. I think we have to remember that the presupposition that goes into the legal system that we have is that there is a culture that understands it, that is able to reinforce it, and is able to ensure its long-term survival. And it presupposes that that culture actually exists. We are now in a situation as a country where, some aspects of the legal system are to put it mildly, in trouble. But we have to look at the other side, the cultural side too. And we've really been failing to do and provide that kind of solidification of our national culture that is required to sustain the legal order. We have to remember that it's not just a matter of legality, but it's also a matter of cultural homogeneity, of having people who are willing to uphold and defend that. So we need to be in a position where we're putting much more emphasis, much more focus on that cultural side. And again, as you said, I think very, very well, Western Europe provides us with a case study of what not to do. And they're figuring this problem out now. They're becoming much more aggressive on denaturalization, for instance. There have been very prominent debates in the past decade in Western Europe about applying those laws and those rules. They're trying. The question of identity matters immensely now, and there's a lot of serious reflection on the need to develop that and to follow that. We just have to look at what they're doing and I think learn what they've done wrong. But also, I think what we see a little bit more and more in recent years is because they're on the front lines of this combat, because they have to deal with the risk of being knifed by people in the country who shouldn't be here, and things of that sort. The kind of low-level quotidian crime and violence, and also a social pressure to change. The women who are afraid to go out in the streets if they're wearing skirts, for instance, because they'll be harassed. We can look at how they've learned and what kinds of discussions they're having, and apply that to our own situation, whether it's on denaturalization or how to ensure that schools are not taken over by Islamic organizations, or restructuring local government to ensure that the areas that are taken over don't have the power to enforce measures on the rest of the population. These are all strategies which they're using on the front lines over in Western Europe that we need to look seriously at here.
There's a video I watched maybe 10 years ago. It was between Sink from the Young Turks and Sam Harris. And I disagree with both of those guys on a lot of things. And Sam Harris is an atheist, not a Christian. He's not a fan of Christianity. But the debate between them was basically why does Islam manifest itself so violently and other faith traditions all over the world don't? Not in the same way. And, Sink was basically, I think, poorly defending against that concept. And Sam Harris, as kind of a secular atheist, was just scientifically explaining why Islam manifests itself in the way that it does. And, a lot of it covers, and I can't recount all 3 hours of that conversation. Mm-hmm. I do recommend people go find it and watch it. It's kind of fascinating. Again, I don't agree with either of them on a lot of things, but I think that Sam Harris, in that interview specifically, did a fantastic job of walking through parts of the Quran to explain why it's just fundamentally different and why we don't see Christian cultures leading to these outcomes and Muslim cultures do, right, and other faith traditions. And I think it's worth watching. Again, I'm not here to tell Muslims what to do. There's 40-something Muslim countries. Power to them. Follow your faith. Good for you. I hope you'll convert to Christianity, but I'm not going to make you convert. You can do whatever you want to do. But we can say here that some of these things can't come here, mm-hmm. and they shouldn't. And that's okay. It's okay to say that. Just like if we were trying to go to their 40-something Islamic countries, they would be okay to say, you can't do that here. We don't want that. Those ideas aren't compatible with our culture. And I think that that's what we need to be able to say, is that it's not compatible with our culture, and it's okay to say that. But a lot of the concepts we talked about, understanding the why, I would recommend that people go watch that Sam Harris video. It's fascinating.
We've touched on how it's not compatible. The alliance of the far left and Islamists, the threat that we face, and how the right can respond to it. But the question I have for you both now, and this is more of a dark question, is if we fail to address this, if we've already seen it failing pretty badly in Western Europe. In the United States, you're starting to see the problems start to simmer a little bit more in Texas and Minnesota and other places. What happens if we fail? What happens if, in 10, 20, 30 years from now, what does our country look like? I'll start with you, Nathan.
Yeah, so I think that often when we're having these discussions, people say, well, look, we're not even sure if it'll reach 10% in the next 20 years. So what are you really worried about? But I think what we're worried about is the presence of a permanent political lobby in this country that is directed towards Islamism, that is directed towards promoting that. And that's something that I think is certainly on the horizon in the next 10, 20 years. Is already existing in local politics in some parts of the country. And the question is how that gets nationalized. So that's something that I think we're not prepared for because it's not really well understood in the common mind when we look at how this is playing out in Western Europe. You have to get down into the nitty-gritty, say, of French politics, where a figure like Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who most of his career was a secular communist, why he suddenly thinks that it's important to defend Islam above all else, and why he changed a lot of his views and commitments towards secularism to accommodate that. You get lots of the nitty-gritty of national politics in another country that a lot of us just pass over or don't pay attention to, but it's there. And what that political lobby does, what that Islamist lobby does, is it sees the state as something that its resources, its programs, and have to remember, right? It's our material resources. It's programs that we support as something that can be redirected towards enhancing their culture, supporting and fighting their own tribal and ethnic conflicts, all using that with our resources and our funds. So next 10, 20 years, I think we see something like that playing out. And that's a big problem. There's also the problem of the quotidian pressures that are placed in Islamic areas, what that will look like. But what I really think that we need to look at most and bear in mind is the danger of what it will be to have an Islamist political lobby existing, not just in the local level like Dearborn, but what that looks like when that is nationalized.
And we've already seen like CARE and Muslim Brotherhood acting not in the best interests of America, catering to a specific, population demographic. They've been catering to foreign interests, and that's a problem. Well, and we should be on the lookout for that. Now, the good news is I think that our system. Well, there's two big things going for us. Our system is, I think, better. I think it is better situated to withstand some of the problems that Europe has faced. I think that our Bill of Rights, our constitutional system, our I think relatively aggressive pushback against woke ideology and all of these nonsensical diversity and equity ideologies, whereas in a lot of Europe they have not had this counter swing against it. It's still alive and thriving. And so I think that we have a built-in legal constitutional mechanism that will be resistant to their aims. So that we have that going for us. Now, again, law of large numbers, population gets to a certain point, a lot of those things become less protected.
Right.
So we, as long as we act, or as the great French pilot Jean-Luc Picard would say, engage. That's the only French name I knew. As long as we engage, and on the public policy side of this, to make sure that we're not bringing radicalized people over this country in large numbers, then I think over time this will, it will be we can address it. We can continue to address it and maintain it. Again, we're not saying that there can't be a single Muslim in the United States, but there can't be large populations of radicalized Muslims that are insularly, they're creating their own communities and then their own political ideologies to advance Islamism. Like that, we have to avoid. And so and then the second thing we have going for us is just again, and this has always been a benefit from different perspectives, is our distance. It is harder for those populations to get here, assuming that we're not just loading unvetted people onto C-130s and bringing them here in the tens of thousands, as we did after Afghanistan. But assuming we're not doing that, it is a little bit more difficult to get here. It's more expensive to get here. It's farther away. If we improve our vetting standards, it's going to be a lot harder to get here. And I think that the path of least resistance for a lot of these communities is going to be not to come here in the future if we get the public policy part of this right. And, all of that married into, I think we've had way too much immigration. I'm not anti-immigration. I'm for immigration that is at the right levels given our current needs, labor needs, cultural needs, national security needs, all of those things. And I think that we've had such high numbers for so long that we need to really pare it down for an extended period of time and then see where we're at in 10, 15 years. And I think that, coupled with increased vetting standards, will help suppress this problem, and then we can continue to fight this at the local, state, legislative level, city council level, and then federally start working against this. But I do think that there's room for federal action against what the aims of some of these communities, whether that's through tweaks of civil rights legislation or at the state level, fighting back against these planned communities that are really just meant to be footholds against those systems themselves. And again, it's not a suicide pact. We can act to defend our country and our communities. And it is illogical for the First Amendment to be read as we have to stand by as and allow 50, 100 million people to just fundamentally undo all of that. Like at a certain point, the existence of the First Amendment cannot be its own mechanism of its own ruin. Like we are allowed to protect that. We are allowed to say the First Amendment will persist, and the Second Amendment will persist, and all of our constitutional rights. And then lastly, a lot of these communities, they don't really have a fundamental conception of natural rights. And I think that we need to have a conversation about that, because I think it will come down to how, and we've already kind of discussed this, but if there's no real conception or belief in natural rights as written in our system through organic law of the Declaration of Independence, through the Federalist Papers, through the Constitution. How is it that so many people are taking an oath? Like, how can you take an oath to be a citizen and not believe in natural rights? Now, again, if you're born here, I don't really care if you believe in natural rights. You're a citizen, a natural born citizen as properly defined. Fine, believe whatever you want to believe. But we can be discerning on those coming here. So I think it's those three. I think we need to be a little bit more understanding culturally of who we're bringing here. We need lower immigration levels for a period of time until it's in our best interest. And we also need to have a frank conversation about specifically Islamists. How can they just structurally and logically ever take an oath to be a citizen? It doesn't seem like that's a logically possible outcome.
Mm-hmm. And actually, to further expand on what you were saying, especially about the founders, like I believe a big portion of the Marines battle hymn, if I'm not mistaken, comes from the Barbary Wars, like from whenever we actually engaged with the Barbary pirates, and it was one of our first wars against Islamists.
Yeah, go read what I think it was Thomas Jefferson had to say about the Mahometans. Like his observations were like they're a problem, and so again. No one alive today was alive then, so was Thomas Jefferson talking about them? No, but I do think that he was recognizing some of the precursors, the Islamic cultural precursors that have bled into the radicalism that we're seeing today, hundreds of years later. And I think that they were seeing some of the same problems that we see now. And again, they can do whatever they want to do there. The second that they touch Americans, the second that they harm Americans, the second that they want to come here, then we have a voice to say no. And I think that we should be saying no on a broader scale, individual outliers, notwithstanding. But at large numbers, we should be more open to saying no for the reasons that I have stated.
Right. So I think we're getting close to wrapping up here. I thought I would let you guys talk to our viewers here. What can they do? How can they get involved here to address this fight and get educated? Nathan, how about we start with you?
Well, I think it's important to pay attention to what is going on in Western Europe, in the UK especially, becoming the UK, as we say online. The pressure that Islamists are placing on politics, supported also, of course, by the political left, is restructuring and transforming British law. We don't live in a time anymore where we can point at Britain and say, Magna Carta, 1,000 years of parliamentary tradition and practice, common law, freedom of speech, and so forth, all these things. In fact, right now, what's happening in Britain is they're pushing towards the abolition of juries, which, of course, in the American context, that's the Sixth and Seventh Amendments. Rights, due process rights that are guided through there. So we're actually going to become an outlier in terms of the tradition that we inherited, that we put in a Bill of Rights format, because we thought it was so important, is being abolished in the country that we drew it from. And the pressure to abolish juries is a large issue, is downstream of multiculturalism. It has to do with not trusting the majority to make that decision, not trusting your peers. That's basically what a jury trial is about. So I think we should be paying very, very close attention to that and recognizing that our antibodies to resist that aren't as strong as we think they are. And what's happening over there is starting to happen more and more over here.
I mean, depending on where you live and depending on what you do, it can be difficult because it's politically volatile. You're going to be called a racist if you try to talk about this. But again, Islam there's Asian Muslims, there's Arab Muslims, there's African Muslims, there's white Muslims. There's also Christian Asians, there's Arab Christians, there's African Christians, there's white Christians. It's not about race. It is literally just about an ideology. And I think people need to be clear. And I think that they need to be careful not to fall into the trap to provide the left the easy counterpoints. This is about ideas that should not be suitable. I don't care about people's skin color. On Sundays when I was in the Marine Corps, my roommate was African American and one of our best friends was Hispanic. And we would, I was a Marine, so it was Sunday. We had been out the night before because that's what Marines do when they're, especially in their 20s. And we would hook IVs up to ourselves and watch football so that we could, but we were Americans. Like it doesn't matter. Like Hispanic guy, black guy, white guy, we're all watching football. We all love America. This is not about race. This is about an ideology that is antithetical to our system. And we need to be comfortable, and people need to understand how to talk about it, without falling into the traps of being called a white supremacist or without being called a racist, and just be willing to say that the things that we have stated here and to advocate for policies that will protect our culture. Whether you're an Asian American, Black American, Hispanic American, white American, etc., we should not have to have people in our communities that believe that bakabazi is okay. And by the way, for those that don't know that term, bakabazi is a tradition. We see this in Afghanistan specifically, where men rape little boys. They're called dancing boys, bakabazi, and that is like a quasi-normal thing. It's not rare. It's not super prevalent, but it happens, and people are just kind of okay with it. There's in some communities they have parades. We should have none of that here. 0% of our population should believe in bakabazi. And people should understand what it is that this ideology believes so that you can attack those ideas. And don't make it about race. You don't have to make it about Islam. You can make it about specific beliefs within Islam. Attack those points, because at the end of the day, there's not going to be a counter argument to that at large levels people will believe. Do you believe that homosexuals should be tortured to death and hung, in public? Whether Christians disagree with homosexuality, I don't think that homosexuals should be tortured and murdered. And by the way, neither should progressive leftists. Right. They shouldn't think that either. And why are they in bed with people who believe these things? Or why are they in bed with people who believe that if a woman was raped, that she has dishonored the family, even though she's the victim, and then now we're going to stone her to death? We should have 0 people like that. And so understand specific applications of the problem we're facing. Attack that specifically, because on a case-by-case, issue-by-issue set, it's really hard for the left to defend this. And it's hard to call you a racist when you're saying, all I'm saying is we shouldn't murder women who have been raped, or we shouldn't rape children. What are we even talking about here? And I think that you'll be on the moral high ground, and you'll be able to go on offense. And I think that whenever you're going to attack stuff like this, I do think that you have to think through the prism of take the moral high ground immediately,
right.
Put their detractors on the defense. Because otherwise, if you just make a kind of a blah, blah statement, racism, blah, 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 you're a bigot, and now you're on the defense. Go on offense. Attack the problem and make them defend it. And I think that if you do that and then advocate for various reforms, I think this is a solution, a public policy problem that needs to be solved at the local, state, and federal level. And there's applications of this that will cross all of those lines that we need to think of. And just be very supportive of it to the degree that people are able to.
Real quick, Nathan. So in your paper, you have actually outlined some solutions. Do you mind going through a few of them?
Well, I think the vetting process,
that's
something we need to really change and think about. We can again draw from other examples of countries that are already doing this and asking much more comprehensive questions that are to check often when people are lying, to confirm with family members or relatives or others. That's one aspect. I think tighter financial regulation to deal with the introduction of foreign funds. That's going to be something very important. Another thing, too, which is not just a problem dealing with Islamism, but a problem dealing with the whole progressive apparatus, is closer scrutiny to 501c3s and how they are being used. Epic City is set up, for instance, as a 501c3. So we have to be providing this kind of close examination of the way that the financial networks are used. I think that's a point of vulnerability that we can focus on and tighten our scrutiny over. But the big question at the end of the day is immigration reform.
Right. I will tease out here first that we're working on a paper right now that you have been helping. You've been the principal writer of it, which will outline a lot more public policy reforms, and I'm not going to get onto all of that right now. But like you were just saying that, like some of the financing, like there's a system, I forget what the name of it is now. I can't remember. I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to botch it. But there's a whole financing system that they use where they just basically put money, they send it via a specific channel from overseas,
right?
And then you just go to a store, like they have them in Northern Virginia, and you just give them a code, and they give you the money. Like there's no it's not like when we try to fill out a mortgage you fill like a stack of papers this big.
Right.
There's none of that. There's no check on it. You literally just give them a code. They give you the cash. Like that's a huge problem. Like I think a lot of radicalism in the United States is being foreign funded through those systems. So we need a stamp down on that type of thing. And I think that the FBI would do well to start following this and figuring out like what's doing more on that front. I do think that at the state AG level, they're going to have to be more aggressive in attacking components of Sharia that are just illegal, that you can't do. And I think that Chip Roy in Texas is running for AG. He's got a lot of ideas. Not an endorsement. I'm just mentioning as a fact he's running there, and he's got a lot of ideas, and he's really been talking about this. And so I'd like to see other AGs taking this more specifically. I think at the city level, you can take noise ordinances. Why is it why should we allow for the call to prayer to be blasted out through minarets all over our communities 5 times a day? Like, okay, you're Muslim, you want to pray, good for you, go pray. You can pray whatever you want to go to your mosque and pray, but we shouldn't, as the American society should not have to be subjected to loud Muslim prayers being bellowed out over our cities. This is the United States of America. This is a Christian nation. Have some respect if you want to be here as a religious minority. Just respect us, and we'll, to a relative degree, respect you as well. And so I think that we need to combat those type of things and be innovative and think through it of how do we challenge these things and survive First Amendment scrutiny. And I think that we need judges that are going to be more willing to understand the limits of the First Amendment and the abuses of it by this ideology, and be open to, on those grounds, limitations on things that I think cross the line between just following your faith versus being a conquering ideology over a native culture and a native legal framework.
Well, I thank you both for your participation today. I think we've established the multifaceted threat of Islamism, that it's a clear and present danger to the United States and Western civilization writ large, and the solutions that we need to address this, along with how we could possibly, go after both the far left and the Islamists and their alliance. I thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.